What's going on, everybody? I'm sitting here overexposed in the dark and spooky Arizona night to talk to you about horror, specifically the genre of horror in film and video games. I've been thinking about horror a lot more seriously recently, ever since Halloween or the days leading up to Halloween, because I've been playing a little bit of Outlast with Emmett. I've been watching horror movies, Netflix, and in theaters, and that's basically it. I've just been thinking about horror recently, and I wanted to share some ideas with you guys. So I guess like the first thing I wanted to say is that basically horror, the genre, especially in film, is sort of known as a trashy genre full of a lot of junk and a lot of cheap scares. And I think that this is mostly fair. I think that a lot of horror movies, probably most horror movies, especially recent ones in theaters, rely on cheap jump scares and are just kind of silly at a lot of parts. Meanwhile, I think that there are some video games that are doing a lot of really interesting things with horror. In fact, I would say that video games are probably a much better medium than film for horror, if not because they're more personal. You know, you're in the middle of the scenario yourself. You're controlling the character. You're seeing it first person, and so you're more. It's another layer of intimacy. You're more engaged. There's some good movies too, though, and I wanted to talk about some themes, some elements, and some rules, as well as some cliches that appear in horror movies. What the weaknesses of these things are and what their strengths are, and maybe what the difference between a theme and a cliche might be. When I think of a horror cliche, I think of something like a cheap tradition that is relied upon reflexively because that's what's been done before. Here you might put into this category like the dark-haired girl in the bathrobe, with her head down. That was in The Ring. That was in a bunch of movies. I can't name any other movies, but you know what I'm talking about. That thing is in so many horror movies that come out in theaters. Another one is like the music box or the wind-up doll that plays like a bell song on bells or wind-up whatever, and sometimes it goes off when a character enters a room and they didn't do anything to set it off, and it just starts playing by itself. These are things that sort of, I guess these are two cliches that fall under a theme of the corruption of innocence, I would say. People find the corruption of innocence very effective in horror. Go all the way back to Omen with Damien, which is a great classic horror film from the 1970s, all the way up to modern horror films like Goodnight Mommy, which is an Austrian horror film that I recently saw. And I think it's very effective. I do think that the corruption of innocence can be very effective, but if you're not careful, you can fall into using silly cliches that don't really work, do nothing for your story. So some themes that I wanted to talk about, themes or effective elements. I think number one is isolation. It's very useful to have your character in a scenario where they cannot get out of it, or they have to rely on like a select group of people. Like you're limiting their choices, basically, whether that's geographically or mentally or whatever. Isolation can be very effective because you have less opportunities to get out, basically. It's as simple as that. This can be done a number of ways. The video game Outlast, is it the second Outlast, or is it, I think it's Outlast 2, takes place in Arizona. There's like a helicopter crash. They fall into this redneck village where they're all part of a cult. So, when your helicopters crash, there you are. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with what you're handed, basically. Mental isolation can work as well. If you go crazy and you start seeing things and no one else sees what you're seeing, then basically you're all alone and dealing with this malevolent force. You don't know if it's real or not, and you have only yourself to rely on. Another good element or theme or whatever of horror that I think is very effective is the theme of not revealing the monster. This is a great one that's talked about a lot. It can't be talked about enough, if you ask me, because it's very important. Do not reveal the scary face or the scary monster or whatever it is that you're trying to scare the audience with. Stephen King's It, the original It film, that like the scary monster was a spider, like a big spider. Oh, it's like, all the suspense leads up to something, and it seems so ridiculous. This isn't a horror book, but the novel 1984, when Winston went into room 101 and he was tortured with the thing that he most feared, you got to find out that he feared something more than anything else, and what does it turn out to be? Rats! They put rats on him. It's like, it just seems lame. The reason that that's the case is because that whatever you're thinking of, whatever scares you, and I mean you personally, is going to, by definition, be scarier than whatever the author can come up with. If you suggest something and let the person's, imagination run away and fill in the blanks, then that's going to be much more effective than giving it all away. This is one that I thought of is symbols are scarier than the thing itself. This is closely related to the don't reveal the monster thing. Here I'm thinking of a great video game project on YouTube called Petscop. If you look up P-E-T-S-C-O-P, Petscop. It's a horror game, but it's not really a game because the guy only made one and he plays it on his channel. Excuse me. The theme of the channel is this guy came across this old PlayStation game that he found, and he's playing through it. It was left to him by his friend who died or something, and he's playing through it, and he finds these notes and he finds these creepy things, and it gets creepier. A story starts to unfold as he plays through it, and the whole time he's playing a game that doesn't have very high resolution at all. It's like an old PS1 game. There's little sprites walking around, but it's so much creepier than if it were some sort of HD 1080 pixel 60 frame per second zombies game, because your imagination fills in the blanks and you can imagine like what these things represent. You go check it out and you tell me what you think of it, because I think they do a very good job. The last theme that I wanted to mention is doubt. I think that things are much scarier and much creepier, especially when you don't know if they're bad or not. So if you don't know if you can trust a character, right? So if a character is clearly evil, then okay, stay away from that character. You don't want to trust it, right? You know something for sure, you know that the person needs to stay away from the character, you know you need to avoid this person, then at least you know that for sure. But if you're not quite sure, if you think but you're not sure that a character is malevolent or evil or tricking you, then it kind of like sticks to you, You don't know which way to go, you don't know what to do. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. It creates suspense more successfully, I think. So, yeah. That's about all I wanted to mention. Let me know if you know of any good horror films, any good horror games that you think I should play. It's very difficult to find good horror movies, I think, because so much of it is crap. People don't want to sit around like watching a bunch of cheap horror movies just to find a good one every once in a while, but it can be worth the effort if you really care. So thanks, guys. Leave a comment, let me know what you think. Recommend me some horror. That's all I gotta say. Bye-bye.